Lo distinto te ha encontrado. Esto es Infinita Podcast. Encuentra nuevos episodios cada semana. Suscríbete.
Bienvenidos al TT Podcast. Este es un especial que salió de sorpresa gracias a Juan Gabriel, que estuvo acá hace poco, del Amarro. Este es le vamos a llamar un Blockchain Week Special, con una persona que tiene mucha experiencia en blockchain, pues lleva 20 años desarrollando. Se llama Cody Marx Bailey. Uh-huh. Y pues tenemos la dicha de poderlo entrevistar justo antes de que agarre su vuelo de regreso al DF. Entonces, esta entrevista va a ser en inglés, así que suerte. Y cualquier preguntas que tengan, nos pueden escribir en los chats. Entonces, Cody, thank you for coming here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
DT Podcast number 37.
Wow, all right.
So, Cody, let us know a little bit about you. You know, what you've been doing. What came. We always try to hear the blockchain origin story of the people we interview. So
sure. So how did I get to where I am today? Sort of. I was real quick background on me. I was born in South Texas, and born on a ranch. Actually, the third largest ranch in the world, the King Ranch. And didn't really have a whole lot to do growing up in the country. You know, it was a lot of riding horses and looking out over the horizon. Nice. And when I was 10 years old, I begged my parents to get me a computer, and luckily they listened, and so I got a computer when I was 10 years old. It's 1990, and figured out that there was this little plug on the back where I could plug in a telephone cable. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird. I mean, what's going on with this? I'm 10 years old at the time, so. So I figured out how to issue AT commands to the modem, and then finally got it talking, and then found out what BBSs were, and then got on a couple of BBSs, and then there's bulletin board systems way back in the day. Like we're talking, this is way back. And then figured out, there's this thing called the internet, right? Which wasn't even a household name at the time. And so I figured out how to set up Trumpet WinSock on my Windows machine, and figured out how to get this thing connected. Then I finally started getting on the internet in 1990. Wow. As a 10-year-old. I have no idea. I mean, this could have been a temporary technology, just a stopgap between where we were and where we might be going. And so I got online and found IRC really early and sort of got into there. And I kind of abandoned the traditional schooling method. I kind of stopped really paying attention at school. All I cared about was getting home to learn faster and quicker and explore these uncharted territories. And I really didn't know what I was doing at the time. I'm 10, 11, 12 years old. You have no idea what you're doing at that time in life, really, with anything. And so I got into some of the hacking stuff, because of course as a 15-year-old kid you start getting into the deviant nature of things.
You saw hackers and stuff.
I was kind of inspired by all that stuff, and I was curious how to break these systems and and it wasn't ever for nefarious purposes. I was never doing it for ill intent. It was just because I was curious, and that's what curious people do. They break the rules and figure out how to they take something apart and they put it back together. And so, so I got into, of course, pirating and stuff, because my family didn't have a whole lot of money. So I had to get my software somehow, and so that stuff went through, and that led me through a lot of things, and sort of during that time, most of the innovation on the internet came from necessity. It was people that wanted to get around the rules, so we developed these really interesting technologies. So things like peer-to-peer networking, and that started off sort of post-Napster, when Napster was taken down, and our little baby, our little music sharing service was taken down. We were like, well, how are we going to get around this? And guys like Bram Cohen and these guys got together and started creating this stuff. Well, I was right there along with them, because I was in the same channel on IRC, hanging out with these guys that were developing this technology. So it's funny, getting back into blockchain, there's a lot more that goes on in there. There's some free culture stuff that I got involved with. Had a couple of articles published in 2600 and stuff like that. It's like a 17-year-old, and so people ask me sometimes the question, how did you get in, so how long have you been into blockchain? And I tell them, well, about 25 years. And they go, but wait a minute, blockchain's only been around for 10 or 11 years, And I said, well, you got to look at all the parts that make up blockchain. You've got the different layers, the different components of this sort of complex system. And the peer-to-peer networking stuff happened, in the late 90s. Like we were already trying to figure out how these systems would work. And then like the game theory and all the different pieces of the cryptography. I was using different crypto methods back in the mid 90s, not really knowing the power that I had and how the math worked. And I'm not going to pretend like I know how the math works now. I trust the math, but I let the crypto guys like really handle the sophisticated, math there. So that's where it kind of how I grew up. I worked for the NSA for a little while. I've never really had I've never worked for a company or like really had a job, but somehow I've managed to pay the bills and like managed to stay alive and do well in life. So I kind of bounced around. I'm autodidactic, never went to college. I hate being told what to do. I can be very easily convinced to do something if it's in my own best interest or if there's an economic incentive or it makes sense, but don't tell me what to do. Don't order me around. So school was never an option for me, but I hung around a lot of really smart people, had really great mentors. And, there's the technology side. I know approximately 20, 25 different languages. And once you pick up 3 or 4 different programming languages, picking up a 5th and a 6th and a 7th isn't very difficult. It's sort of just additive and, you use semicolons instead of tabs and, you move things around. There's the technical side, which I'm very proficient at, and I understand how to build applications and like how architectures work, and I've worked in embedded systems to all the way up to like web applications. So really getting into like all the philosophy around computing and different architectures and all this stuff. But then there's sort of this other side of computer science that sometimes goes unrecognized or unappreciated, and that's the cultural side. And that's where like when blockchain really came around and we started seeing like smart contracts. And it's funny because 99.9% of the population that knows what smart contracts are now don't realize that smart contracts was a concept developed back in the 80s. Yeah, you go back into the roots of this stuff. This has all been dreamed up for a long time. The crypto manifesto, like all these different. These have been around for a long time, and if you go back and read about Zimmerman and the guys back in the 70s, it really gets into like the cat being out of the bag and what are we going to do with these algorithms that we weren't supposed to release. And so you get into this, like, there's the underground culture of this stuff, and that's the cult of the dead cow and like going back into like some of the old Goldstein writings and all this kind of stuff. And then there's this other piece, and that's sort of what drew me down here to Guatemala, and I've been working with UFM on some of their stuff, is this idea that like, these technologies have a much bigger social implication. Yeah. It's not just getting rich quick on Bitcoin or trading, software online. It's like software is now becoming so sophisticated with such power and such unstoppable force that we're starting to see it like really trickle into the places that it really like has the biggest social impact. The internet gave us Netflix, it gave us Facebook, it solved the communications problem. And philosophically, 35 years later, you can look back at the internet and say, what problem did it actually solve? Well, it solved the communications problem, made the world a lot smaller. So, in 25 years, we'll be able to look back at blockchain and go, what did it really do? And my thesis right now is that it solves the trust problem.
The Byzantine generals problem.
Yeah, it's the trust problem in society. And so, we've been building these monstrous governments, these monstrous systems that are human-powered. And they have, when you put humans, fallible creatures, in charge of systems, things like corruption tend to happen unless you've got really strong controls. And, there's this sort of asymmetrical risk-reward sort of incentive structure with anything that's human-powered. And so I think now we're finally seeing this technology threaten those trust models. And that's the part that powers me. Like, I think it's really cool when we, beacon chains and side chains and lightning networks. I mean, the geek inside of me, the engineer inside of me really enjoys that stuff. But it's when you get into the social implications, like how this is going to fix real problems. And living in Latin America, living in Mexico right now and seeing the corruption, living the corruption, breathing the corruption.
Exactly.
You start to, and all it does is it fuels that passion to like keep pushing these things forward, keep educating people, keep at it, man. Like, and right now we're laughing because we're getting bottlenecks on Ethereum. When a new app comes out, we have this like the network doesn't work, right? But that shows that it's working. It shows that we're maxing out its capabilities. And if we stopped working on the internet in 1993 because our JPEGs loaded over a minute, we would have never gotten to Netflix at 4K on our cell phones on 4G networks.
Exactly.
Like you have to have that perspective. And there's a little bit of patience and you get the small wins. But like in 2 or 3 years, like with Ethereum, I'm a huge Ethereum developer. When Ethereum 2 comes out, and it'll probably be another 4 years before that comes out.
Yeah. Nobody knows, right? Nobody knows it's in the air, but it's happening.
It's ready when it's ready.
Happen.
Like, don't rush it. We can't rush these kind of things. And luckily there's no market out there that's telling us we got to hurry.
Exactly.
We'll get it done. But we'll look back in 2 years and go, wow, look how far we've come. 2 more years, look how far we've come. Look how far we've come.
I mean, 2 years in the crypto space is almost eternity.
It feels like it. Yeah. Yeah, 2 years is like 10 years ago.
Yeah. I think I would like to go a little bit deeper into the trust part, because I do see like Bitcoin and Ethereum as truth machines in a way.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to say this without, sounding really crazy and like going to conspiracy theory or whatever into it. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that Bitcoin has, because it's a communication problem. Actually communicating all these things that it solves, all the layers that it has, and then for the person to understand it, it's really difficult. And it's even more difficult when you're already so deep into the situation, like in our economies where corruption is just a given.
Yeah.
That you don't see how are you going to get out of there. And one of the main motivators for us here at DT is exactly that. We believe that blockchain is what's going to give us the tools to really clean out our economy and create traceable, auditable, decision processes to make people accountable for whatever they're doing.
Sure.
And like that, we can really prosper as a society, because we have everything. I mean, we're blessed with the country that we have, and we can produce anything.
If you can just root out that
Exactly.
the corruption or the graft and the inefficiencies a lot of times.
So maybe you can help me explain a little bit about what the Byzantine general's problem is,
okay.
and how does this actually like go into it?
Yeah. So describing the BFT is kind of a difficult. This is one of the ones that I've had trouble with in the past. But essentially, what it boils down to is the need for intermediaries to basically certify information. So when you have a space where you have individuals that want to cooperate, you end up. And this is not I'm not talking about BFT in the most scientific or academic way. I'm kind of explaining what this problem is. And so with humans, having the communication bit solved, the internet, it gives us the ability to cooperate with more people, right? And you're not having to use carrier pigeons and horseback to get messages around. We can do it instantly. But you have to have some way of mathematically proving that the intent is bound by the person who had the intention. And so there's a way you have to have these tools in order for you to do that, and that's where the whole PKI stuff, public key infrastructure, private public key, asymmetrical encryption helps out with. But you also need this sort of these mechanisms to incentivize, and that's the whole piece here. Is like when you look at economics, and I'm kind of straying around and kind of floating around here, but when you have you have to have, you study economics, and economics is really nothing more than the study of actions by irrational actors, right? I mean, like computers don't know what economics are. They just, if 1 is bigger than 2, then do that. If 2 is bigger than 1, do that. Like, so that you have this, that's a very simple way of looking at it, but humans are irrational, so we do all kinds of irrational things. So how do you get humans to cooperate? Well, you can do it either by force, by gun, or you can do it by economic incentive, right? So what is the best choice for me? And we make economic decisions, dozens of times per hour. Is it worth me getting up and walking across the room to get my own coffee, or to get in my car and drive to get lunch, or should I get Rappi to deliver? Do y'all have Rappi in Guatemala?
We have Globo and Ugo and Uber Eats.
Everybody's got every country's got their own homegrown system, and we'll see. Yeah, and they'll all get bought out eventually. And
It's Colombian, actually.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, but yeah, you make these decisions every day, and so you really, in order to really dissect all the stuff that's going on in the blockchain or DT space, you really have to go to the roots of all these different pieces. You can't just say, oh, economics is that's like the charts and the money and the what happens. Like, well, that's one area, but economics is a much different. It's a decision-making study. So how do you get all those people to work together? And that's where, if you look at things like the central bank, and that's where you have to start. You have to start at the central bank. You can't look at banking and like your savings account and the interest rate there and credit cards and the fee that Visa and MasterCard take. You can't start there. You have to go way farther back, way back to the 1500s, to the Medici family. Like, you have to go back to the roots of these things and why they happened. It's funny because you'll have a friend of mine, Fred, who I always pay homage to in these talks. Like, Fred's he's like my biggest inspiration for going out and exploring these topics. But he taught me that you have to go back to French liberal theory and what the French were writing in the 1500s. That's where it starts. Like, all this crap, you have to start there, and you get into some really heady stuff about English common law and the reasons for all this stuff. But it all plays a part. Because as you start to build these systems and understand the Byzantine generals problem, how we're fixing that, or how we have, for 11 years, kind of proven that we fixed that, is how do you build, the two words are, consensus and building these ledgers out. And a ledger is nothing more than just a tabulation of transactions or activities. And how do you decentralize that piece? Well, before we had this central bank. We still do, but
we still do, yeah.
In my mind, I'm living in a world where we don't have central banks.
We'll get there.
Yeah. But they're the ones that are in charge of that. And by force, by taxation, they enforce that you pay with U.S. dollars or Mexican pesos or Guatemalan quetzals. They're the ones that institute that thing. And you know what? And to be honest, we can sit here and as these people that are looking forward into the future and having these crazy conspiracy ideas, we have to also at the same time respect and kind of admire how far we came with these systems that we see so many problems with. I mean, just drive down the road and look at the skyscrapers and look at all the good that it has brought the world. There's naysayers out there that'll say, yes, but what about the homeless, and what about the famine, and but do you know where this world would be without those? There'd be way more. So you really have to stop and say, look, the central banks did a really great job getting us to this point, allowing for all of this insane amount of prosperity and peace around the world. You have to look at those things and take and really admit that those systems did very well. But there's some of us that can say, well, we can do better. Why stop at good when you can do better? And there's always a better tomorrow. There's always a better tomorrow. And that's that whole thing behind progress that kind of keeps us up at night and keeps us developing these technologies. Kind of all over the map again, but
it's great. It's great.
I'm letting it flow.
I'm tempted to ask about what's your opinion on CBDCs? Central bank digital currencies?
Well, those are really great. They do a few things. We're talking about anti-fragile systems. So make sure I get back to your question. But for listeners, the anti-fragile systems are basically systems that get stronger over time. The more they're attacked, the stronger they get. And so you see, I think, a lot of the more advanced Western economies and countries have realized that don't attack this thing because it only gets stronger. The more we attack it, the worse the problem gets. Which is why you see in the United States, using that as a prime example, kind of be a little hands-off and kind of a let's wait and see. And then you have these reactionary governments in other parts of the world, Venezuela, where it's needed the most, parts of Africa where it's needed the most. And anytime we watch these things, we watch the headlines, right? Because every morning we wake up, we see the headlines, then we go check the market to see what happened. Look at the trade volume on the Korean exchange, or go look at the Iraqi exchange and see what's going on. What the central bank, the digital currencies are two things. One, they're a day late and a dollar short. They're a little late to the game on this thing. You should have fixed these problems a long time ago. You should have not made this a necessity, right? And so the trust is already lost. Sorry, this is a lot of the same way that how the man in office in the United States got elected. It's like if had the last 3 presidents done their job, you wouldn't have had this asshole in office. And so if the central banks had been doing their job and hadn't been so corrupt, by nature, we wouldn't have had the need for a Bitcoin. But that's the way the story goes. I mean, there was really no other option. So there's this sort of they're a little late to the game, and like you should have solved these problems. And the other thing is they're endorsing these things when they use the same, basically the blueprint for Nakamoto's paper. It's like, wow, you're endorsing that these things work. Like the actual technology works. Now, what is it backed by? That's
where they go and pump up and say, well, by us.
Yeah, and by force or by taxation, we're going to enforce that you use our currency. Well, that doesn't play well with a lot of us. That doesn't play real well with a lot of people. A lot of people feel that they're, we're heritage is, we're bound by the land of our heritage. This is where I'm from. This is the water. These are the waters that I swam in, the foods that I ate, and the songs that we sang. But when it gets into economics, it's like if the U.S. government doesn't, they force me to pay in dollars or I can pay in gold, well, now I have a decision to make. Mm-hmm. What is that currency backed by? And there's sort of this emperor wearing no clothes possibility in the future where why is it backed? In the U.S. for the most part there's a lot of geopolitical reasons why the U.S. dollar is the reserve currency. Guns, real estate, there's a lot of reasons why the U.S. has that clout. But we'll see where that goes in the next 50 years. I mean, we're talking the world's wealth.
But they do have a lot of pressure now. I mean, the grilling they did to poor Sok a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
And the whole talk about Libra, for me, puts into perspective. Like governments and central banks specifically are starting to notice, okay, we need to do something and innovate, or private industry is going to come and eat us up.
Well, yeah,
that's going to happen.
I think the story of Libra and what you just said is a little larger than that. It's not just into the currency, but in the United States, and I'm American, so I mean, this is in my wheelhouse, of course, but. The power and influence in the United States has always been in Washington, D.C. The markets in New York would have a say-so, but D.C. had the power. And we're starting to see that Silicon Valley is starting to sort of rival the amount of influence and power that Washington, D.C. has. And Libra is just one example, but then you have the Twitter and the social media. And if you look at who's been being interviewed in Congress right now at these hearings, they're starting to reel some of that back and say, wait a minute, San Francisco, you don't have carte blanche access to media. You don't have, that is not something that you can do. And I think over the next 5 years, we're going to see sort of the regulation come down on these platforms. Either you're a publisher or you're a platform, but you can't be both, and you can't shapeshift based on the political wind. And I think that's what we're seeing. Libra is just now you've brought it front and center, because now you have Wall Street and central banks going, hey, we need to address this sooner than later. And so I think they're going to get slapped back pretty big. And
that was pretty obvious.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of Silicon Valley. Yeah, I'm not a fan of Silicon Valley or the mentality that neoliberal. I'm a classical liberalist.
Let's go into your work on the 721, on the ERC 721, because I think it also grabs a lot of what we've been talking right now. It goes into the topic of just being able to tokenize anything, basically. Assets.
Yeah.
So at DT, we actually do have a protocol that goes on that. It's called Blockchain Asset Registry. And you create a little nice QR code, and then you can upload your picture, and then you have a description of your asset, and then you can tokenize it with simple ICO.
And that's in 721?
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's based on a 721.
Nice. Yeah. Awesome.
So I do know quite a bit of a 721.
This was I guess 2 years ago, 2-3 years ago. Time flies. It's. So I saw that the CryptoKitties thing came out, and that was sort of the blueprint of the reason for us to develop this protocol. And I worked with Will Intrican and these guys and it was it's funny because people in industry are like, oh wow, so this thing, this standard, this bit of code, and you have to explain what standards are to these
and protocols. And
it's like, so it's a patent. I'm like, no, it's a standard. And they're like, well, who standardizes it? And I'm like, well, we did. And they're like, who are you? And I'm like, nobody.
Right? But it's open source and it's in GitHub, and if people use it, it's a standard.
So we go through the whole, like, I have to go through the ERC, EIP, rigmarole, how that gets put together.
Okay.
And literally, like, I'm like, no, just go look at the conversation we had. And one of the big things that I pushed for, and this was, I'm rather proud of this, because everybody was talking about tokenizing CryptoKitties and tokenizing like swords and shields in games, which is a huge opportunity there, to take away the central bank, quote unquote, central bank of items in World of Warcraft.
Okay.
Right. So because you don't know if Blizzard is printing up more elite swords, the top sword, like all of a sudden my sword's not worth as much because I don't know the
how many are in the market.
I can't see the ledger, and I just have to trust that. There's a whole. So that's one area. But the one feature that I was really adamant about was the two-way, the double the two-way transfers, right? So in other words, let's say if I have a $1,000 sword and I give it to you, why would you not want to accept it, right? So there was this premise early on in the 721 discussions that all items had a positive value, and I said no, because what if you have a debt? Should I just be able to send my debt to you and we play hot potato? You should have to accept that. Now, if I'm sending a $1,000 sword, well, there's really no reason for you not to accept it. And in fact, it would just add complexity to something that you would obviously want. But let's say we had this whole list of like debts. Let's say I'm transferring title from a house, and all of a sudden it's, tax season comes up, and I'm like, I can throw that tax burden on somebody else without them accepting it. That was really the one piece that I saw in there that was like, and I fought for it. You can go back through the discussions and the back channels. Well, the back channels I think are closed now, but you can go back and see that I was really adamant about that part, because I wasn't thinking about digital assets. I was thinking about real estate, car title. I mean, I'm talking. You want the amount of, a lot of people get into blockchain for the currency reason. And they watch the charts on Bitcoin and XLM and all these different thousands of currencies that we have out there. And they study the dollar and gold-backed currencies and all this kind of stuff, but it's really the currency thing. But if you look at the world and you want to know like where the real wealth is, it's not in the currency. I mean, I'll give you an example. There's $30 trillion worth of mobile assets in Europe alone.
Wow.
Mobile assets are anything that can be moved. Like real estate can't be moved. A hotel, you can't move a hotel from Vienna.
Yeah, those are not really liquid, but the whole thing is to create liquidity, right?
Right, but like but jewelry, watches, cars, yachts, paintings, all that stuff can be moved, right? So those are mobile assets, but it's $30 trillion. You talk about the real estate market in the United States, and it's like it's almost too hard to wrap your arms around. So if we were to say Bitcoin's going to be the reserve currency of the world, I mean, that's the currency, Bitcoin. Ethereum is sort of like this commodity that we use to power contracts. Like it's not
exactly. I see it more like a programmable layer and easier to.
Yeah, and it's got a different, and there's a really good analogy I'll talk about just because it's really handy for these kind of things. But you look at the amount of currency in the world, and then you look at the amount of assets in the world. Assets like trump the currency by 50 times. I mean, there's like 100 times more value in objects and buildings than there is in cash and like liquid cash. It's all denominated in cash, but it's so that's where I saw the opportunity. I was like, well, everybody's worried about the currency. Like, what if you were? And then when 721 came around, everybody was like real hyped up about. And if you go to a lot of these 721 conferences, they're all talking about gaming. And I'm like, you guys are missing the boat. We're talking about real estate, bro. Real estate. We're talking billions of dollars.
Art, just.
The art
power,
industry,
the artist and the creator in general. I think.
All of that. I mean, and your intellectual property in a much more abstract way. So. Going back to what we were saying about the currency, and then I said, Ethereum is much like a commodity, and these are principles that or stances that I came up with over the last 5 or 6 years of working in this area, living, breathing, sleeping, traveling. It's consumed my
dreaming.
Life. Yes, dreaming. A lot of mistakes being made. Let's not forget those. Really, really bad trades at 4 a.m. That kind of thing. So if we look at Bitcoin, it looks a lot like gold. There's a finite amount, or at least with gold, there's a seemingly finite amount. It's not like we're going to go out and find another $1 trillion worth of gold tomorrow. So there's like kind of the safety net that like gold has only so much of it out there. You can 8 decimal points deep. You can, there's a lot of very, very similar qualities of gold and Bitcoin. And I think everybody in the space goes, yeah, that makes sense, and store of value and means of exchange and all this kind of stuff. Then you look at Ethereum and you're like, well, Ethereum, that's just another cryptocurrency, and it has a value, and it trades just like Bitcoin. It's just 1/20th of the or 1/50th of the cost or whatever it is now. So it's another currency. It's like not really. In my opinion, the best way to explain Ether, which is the currency on Ethereum, is it's a lot like oil. It's a commodity, right? So we have to step back, go into another vacuum, right, to analyze what is oil, right? Oil has a value because you can actually use oil. You can turn it into petroleum to push your car down the road. You can make plastics. It has a utility. But the moment that we move to electric vehicles and we aren't using these petroleum-based products, if that were all to vanish tomorrow, oil wouldn't be worth anything. So, taking it back to Ethereum, what gives Ethereum value? Well, every bit of Ether that you own, the smallest denomination of, is actually measured into a computing cycle. It's an incentive for the miners to execute logic in a trusted environment. That's what you said earlier. That is what gives Ether its value. It's a utility. If smart contracts, all of a sudden, if that whole layer was wiped out of Ethereum, what do you got? I mean, there's nothing there, like the whole value structure. So you have to look at those two things totally different. And so if you look at the way that corn trades, if you look at the way, like the needs of the network, like what is the future use of that? Well, you don't do the same. You don't use those same methodologies with Bitcoin. They're completely different. You want to do Bitcoin versus, and even Bitcoin SV blurs the line. Now you've got right now you got hybrids and you got all these like wacky systems and people re-engineering, redeveloping, splitting, forking, all this kind of stuff. So,
and I think that's where it gets really interesting, the whole space, because you do need to have a fundamental knowledge of what you're actually doing and understand the thing to really appreciate what it's going to give to the world.
Yeah, it takes big vision. You have to get big on these things. You can't stay. Yes, you have to have, in order to get really deep, you have to have a computer science engineering background, or at least a complex systems analysis background.
Well, just at least know what it is in a binary system and stuff like that, and because then you're going to appreciate. But I think even you can, because I'm not a coder. I came later from fintech. I came into Bitcoin and then moved into that. And started working with tech people, but I did challenge myself to, understand what Satoshi was saying. And now I'm not saying that I understand the white paper, because honestly, I don't. Maybe 25% of it.
Well, but you get the premise.
I get the premise. I understand, and I understand. I can read the code, and then if people that know how to code tell me, okay, it is trustworthy.
Sure, and the same way I am with the algorithms. Like I don't know how trapdoors and S boxes work in crypto. Like in cryptography, but I know that there's some really, really smart people that have tested this stuff for 45 years, and they haven't shorted the market on a SHA-256 exploit. Exactly. So I'm pretty sure there's about $250 billion sitting on a
security.
Security, yeah.
So, talking about the tech part, and I think it's a very interesting analogy what you're bringing, and it will help a lot for people to understand. Let's go into mass adoption. Where do you see mass adoption? How do you see it happening?
This gets back into, we can...
I know, we can talk and the plane will go and then we can keep on talking.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I find myself in these conversations just like this till 5 or 6 in the morning. And it's like, man, at some point I got to call this thing off because we're like down 5 or 6 rabbit holes and I don't know how to get home. So... the mass adoption, that's kind of funny. So if you look at who owns that 17 million let's just talk about Bitcoin. Let's just talk about the king of coins.
Okay.
Who owns the majority of Bitcoin? It's in Western societies. Like the United States has probably the most. China has a lot. But China uses they don't see Bitcoin as a future. They see it as a way to get their money out of China. A lot of times they want dollars. They're still like the Chinese miners want dollars.
And Russian.
Yeah, they just want safety. And as the world, and this is I don't want to get too much into politics and geopolitics, but if a lot of those people feel that things aren't going to go very well in other parts of the world, there's only a few places in the world that have the demographics and the sort of bright future that other parts of the world have. And so, the Chinese, and this is like reflective in the real estate market in the United States and the gateway cities, you see real estate prices skyrocketing. The Chinese are coming in, and the foreign wealth that wants to get the heck out of their country, and they're willing.
Canadians have a big problem with that.
Vancouver,
well.
Vancouver, gateway cities. You can see it, and you're starting to see it in some of the smaller cities, in like Kansas City, Dallas, Houston, sort of in the interior. But they're coming in, and even with inflated prices, they're fine. If they can get 50 cents on the dollar, if they can get a 50% return in 10 years, that's 50% they got back that they couldn't if they left it in yuan or whatever junk currency that's out there.
WeChat.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you look at mass adoption. So, so there is a sort of inequality that's happened already, right? I mean, I know several people with, just insane amounts of coin that the game to buy in, right? So as you I've spent some time here in Guatemala, and like when you drive, and when I'm in these, I live in Mexico City with 25 million crazy people, and crazy is a very good way to describe the Mexican people. I love them. I love living there. But when you get into the Bajío in Mexico, or you drive out through into Guatemala, and you drive out towards like Lake Atitlan, and you go through some of those villages, and you see that people are making dollars a day. It's like, how are those people supposed to catch up?
Exactly.
And still, in the grand scheme of things, $1 a day could be worth, 200 in 10 years. But how, when there's guys that are sitting on so much coin in the United States, banks, investment bankers, people, we're talking about a $250 billion market cap.
Right now,
right? And if the eggheads that advise those sovereign wealth funds and central banks and these investment bankers say, you know what? I don't really like this system, but if it, the geeks tell me it might actually work and there's some merit to it, and once the light bulb goes off, and they throw $250 million at it out of a $80 billion portfolio as a hedge, they just bought up, how are we supposed to compete with that? Like how are we supposed to deliver the value to the Guatemalan, snow pea farmer? Like how is he supposed to catch this revolution when you've still got Wall Street doing that? So that's one part. The second part is, you'll see adoption in places that it's needed the most. Necessity is the mother of innovation. And so I don't think you're going to see buy a Big Mac at McDonald's with Bitcoin in the United States, because you have the dollar as your alternative, right? But when you're in Venezuela, things change. Right?
Well, probably you'll try to buy it with a lot of bolivars, and you're going to need like a whole
a wheelbarrow to do this. But you see what I'm saying? I think that it's the developing world, or the places like Mexico is a great, and part of the reason I moved to Mexico for the culture, the weather, the people, the food, the cost of living.
They have a lot of inflation.
They do. I get paid in dollars, and then I spend in pesos, which is a really really great system to go there. Yeah, and I can't legally work in Mexico. I just have
just a
residence. Yeah, I can live there, but I can't take another job. I can work from Mexico though. There's a really. I haven't spent a whole lot of time in Latin America. Like I haven't been to South America. I haven't been to Colombia or South. Just got from Panama, but I have a soft spot for Mexico and really Guatemala now. As I've traveled here more and more, they're completely different countries, even though they share a border. Y'all are 50 times quieter than Mexicans. But it's not even close. And anyway, the one thing I love about Mexico and the sort of Mexican citizenship, or the citizens of Mexico, is that they really have this disdain and hate for their government. In the United States, we have this sort of oppressive government that lives above us, and it's all based on where we come from, England, where we respect authority, right? And in Mexico,
it works. It kind of works.
Yeah, but in Mexico, it doesn't work for the people. And Mexicans, again, this is one man's opinion. So if there's any Mexican listeners, don't look for me on the street and throw tomatoes. it's a there's this like strong sort of distrust and sort of they put up with government. They don't welcome it. It's like this necessary evil in their life, and if they were given the opportunity to override government, they would do it in a heartbeat. I mean, we're talking the people out in the lower class. They would do that in a heartbeat. If I can get away from the peso and not have the value of that thing keep dropping for my exports, they would do it in a heartbeat. And so there's that sort of, I think places like Latin America, you have the education, you have the knowledge, and the wherewithal and the need. It's kind of the right recipe for this part of the world to do it.
Mobile penetration as well. We have more cell phones than people actually.
Absolutely, and you're seeing like that need. So all it's going to take is like a couple of hyperinflation threats to get people to kind of reach for the Bitcoin and say, I don't want the Quetzal, I want the Bitcoin. Like, why? Because it keeps going up, and I my crazy nephew told me 3 years ago this was going to happen, and he's right. And he's got a really nice house now and a few cars, like that kind of thing. It's like, so I think that's where mass adoption is going to happen. I think in the currency side.
Yeah, I want to go into the smart contract.
Smart contracts, which is really more where I play because it's more fun. Like you can sit there and go on forever about Bitcoin philosophy and.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, smart contracts, people believe it's like new things, but really, I mean, Nick Szabo was writing about it in 1994.
Yeah.
I think it was his first time that he wrote it. He was here at the UFM.
Yeah.
He did a couple of talks.
Yeah.
I went to the three of them, and it took the three of them for me to understand what he was actually saying.
Yeah. But the first two were like, there's something here and I'm missing it, but I'm going to stay at this, yeah.
In his pictures with old money and little pebbles and stuff like that.
Yeah, shekels and all the...
Yeah. Deep into that.
Yeah.
So, on the smart contract side, where is mass adoption there? I know you're working with something legal on
Yeah, on compliance and auditing, basically. I have a startup, Smart KX, and we're about 9 months old. My partner Lacey and I, who I absolutely love working with, she came up with this. She's a compliance attorney, and there's certain people in the world. Thank God, there's people like Lacey that just love financial compliance law, right? Like the world needs people who love financial compliance law, and so she and I were officing together, and she heard me talking about this blockchain stuff, and she's always asking me questions. She's like this really inquisitive mind, and she's a lawyer by trade, but she's so much more than that, in theory and philosophy and stuff. And so she's asking me about these smart contracts, and I'm waxing on about these things and how cool they are, and well, what does that mean? And show me how to write Solidity. And I'm like, well, like baby steps here. And so so I was talking about how these smart contracts work and the principles of disintermediation. Like, what does a broker do? Explain to me what a broker does. Oh, a broker does this. No. Just dumb it down. What does a broker do? They are the intermediary. They take a fee to do a process that they have been knighted to do that piece. What does a bank do? What does a bookie do for betting? All these examples. And once she got this principle, she starts looking around in her industry. She looks around and she finds this one little, it's little because it's a small process tucked way back in these financial institutions. I won't get into it in the podcast in detail because it's, you've got to be like.
I see it goes deep.
Yeah, but she found this really, really interesting problem that costs a lot of money in the auditing process. And it basically, she's like, hey, Cody, your technology could, that you're working on could probably apply here. And that was this like sort of marriage of like, she's way deep in this one area, and I'm way deep over in computer science. And the people that know what I know have no earthly idea that her problem exists. And the people that know about that problem are so far away from where I am, they don't know that there's a solution waiting for them. So we identified this, and that's just where you tie those two things together, and that's the aha moment that you're going to fix this one. I say small because it's so inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, but the value provided is enormous. So that's my main focus these days. That's like the startup that I, for like 3 years when I was coin rich, I was trying all these different ideas. I had these wacky ideas about doing all this different stuff, and this was the one that kind of made it out. This is the one that I was like, that's the horse I'm going to ride out on. And
so you talk with a lot of lawyers about blockchain
Yeah, lawyers and computer science guys or computer scientists are very similar in the way that they think about the world. They're logic based. They're methodical. And it's funny because prior to blockchain, prior to all of this stuff happening, decentralized technologies, anytime lawyers were involved in computer science, it was a bad thing. Right, like the last people you want in the room, like the lawyers are going, "Oh shit, what happened? Like, what do we do? What law did we break that we don't know we broke?" But now, there's this sort of like, we're in the same room, and the attorneys are kind of like they've realized that they need the computer science guys to explain this to them, as much as the computer science guys need the help of the lawyers to make sure that what we're doing is in concert.
Yeah.
But the attorneys have been really great to work with. They're a different breed of people, but they're very similar because they're all logic based. They're looking for exploits in systems, how to get around laws. Like, it's a really interesting group to work with, and I've really enjoyed doing that.
Nice. Well, Cody, we don't want to hold you up. You need a plane to catch and the traffic to grab. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I think it was a great talk. A lot of knowledge and everything. If you want to give a last statement, share any links or.
For the techie guys out there, I think the it's not new, but it's definitely the most intriguing piece of technology that I've been looking at over the last year is the Mimblewimble stack, and what it does. There's a leap of faith you have to take with the ledger and knowing that the cryptography works. But when you remove the ledger from the equation, you have to trust that the math is keeping the balance without showing the balance. Mm-hmm. That's a really big leap of faith that we're going to have a hard time swallowing moving forward. But Mimblewimble and like Grin and all those kind of things are really interesting technologies. If you're looking for something cool to look at and like grind your brain on, those are great. That's off the top of my head. I've got 1,000 other things I could talk about.
And you want to share your link? Do you have a GitHub? Share?
Yeah, so most people know me as Superfly. Like, I chose it when I was like 12 or maybe 11, and I was a freaker with phone systems. So anytime you saw an F, you change it to a PH, like phone, in English, PH for phone. Mm-hmm. And so I'm Superfly with a PH, SUPERPHLY. And if you Google that, you'll find all my work out there. I was involved really early in the co-working space. I founded the second co-working space in the world 15 years ago. Worked on hashtags really early with Chris Messina. Stuff like that. Bill Conference, opposite of TED. Stuff like that. There's a lot of fun stuff out there.
Nice.
So, yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Y a ustedes gracias por acompañarnos. Y como siempre, sigan informándose, educándose y así pueden participar. Hasta la próxima.
Lo distinto te ha encontrado. Esto es Infinita Podcast. Encuentra nuevos episodios cada semana. Suscríbete.